6 months passed, and the galaxy kept dying. The red zones on Admiral Hartley's map had swallowed more than half of known civilized space. Every week brought reports of another species gone, another cluster of worlds reduced to silence. The Galactic Forum had stopped functioning entirely because there were not enough surviving members to hold a session. The great trade routes that had once carried ships between 1,000 worlds were empty now, dark highways leading nowhere. And the refugees had started arriving at Earth's door. Commander Nathan Cole stood on the bridge of Perimeter Station 7, one of a dozen defense platforms that formed a ring around the Sol system. He was 38 years old, had a wife and 2 kids back on Earth, and had spent his entire military career hoping he would never have to make the kind of decisions he was now making every single day. The quarantine doctrine had been passed unanimously by every government on Earth. The rules were simple and absolute. No biological material crosses the perimeter. No exceptions, no appeals. The survival of the human species depended on keeping pathogen Sigma out of the Sol system, and that meant the border stayed closed. Nathan understood the logic. He agreed with the logic. But logic did not make it easier to watch ships full of dying aliens drift helplessly on the other side of his defense grid. "Commander," said Lieutenant Amy Dawson, his communications officer. She was young, barely 26, and she had dark circles under her eyes that had not been there 3 months ago. "We have another convoy incoming. 14 ships, Marathi origin. They are requesting emergency docking." Nathan closed his eyes for just a moment. The Marathi. Of all the alien species humanity had encountered, the Marathi had been the kindest. They were tall, graceful beings with skin that glowed softly in the dark. They had been among the first to welcome humanity into the galactic community. They had shared agricultural technology that had ended food shortages on 3 continents. Marathi musicians had performed on Earth, and their concerts had moved audiences to tears. Now they were dying, and they had come to the one place in the galaxy that might still be safe. Nathan looked at the sensor display. 3 of the 14 ships were already showing failing life support. The heat signatures on those vessels were dropping. People were dying on those ships right now, at this very moment, while he stood here on his clean, warm bridge. "Send a drone with fuel cells, water, and food," Nathan said. His voice was flat and controlled. "Transmit our full medical database on Sigma. Tell them we will provide everything we can, but the perimeter stays closed. Sir, they are asking if they can at least send their children." Nathan felt something crack inside his chest. He stood very still for a long time. "The perimeter stays closed," he said again. "For everyone." Amy sent the message. The response came back a few minutes later. It was a video transmission from a Marathi elder, a female whose glow had faded to a dim, tired blue. She looked directly into the camera and spoke in a voice that was soft and clear. "We understand," she said. "Protect your people, dear friends. One of us should survive this." The transmission ended. Nathan stood on the bridge and watched the 14 ships slowly turn away, heading back into the darkness. 3 of them never made it out of sensor range. Their engines failed, and they drifted cold and silent until the scanners could no longer pick them up. Nathan did not eat dinner that night. He sat alone in his quarters and stared at the wall and tried to remember what the galaxy had sounded like when it was still alive. Back on Earth, Lisa Grant and Kevin Porter were buried in work. They had assembled a team of over 300 scientists in a sealed research facility deep inside the Rocky Mountains. The complex had originally been built to survive a nuclear war. Now it was being used to survive something much worse. For months, the team had been studying pathogen Sigma from every angle. They had samples collected by automated probes sent into dead zones. They had biological data from dozens of extinct species. They had run more simulations than anyone could count, and they kept hitting the same wall. Sigma was too adaptive, too efficient, too perfectly designed to exploit biological life. There seemed to be no defense against it. Then, on a Tuesday evening at 11:30, Kevin Porter found something. He had been comparing immune system data across species, not looking at how Sigma attacked, but at how different immune systems responded to the initial infection. And he noticed something strange about the human data. Every alien immune system he studied was specialized. They were elegant, efficient, perfectly tuned to handle the specific threats found on their home worlds. The Korath immune system was a fortress, incredibly strong against reptilian diseases, but rigid and inflexible. The Alani immune system was fast and precise, able to identify and neutralize avian pathogens in hours. Every species had evolved the perfect defense for their own world. But human immune systems were different. Human immune systems were a mess. Kevin called Lisa over to his workstation. She looked exhausted. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot, and there was a coffee stain on her lab coat. But when she saw what Kevin was pointing at on his screen, her tiredness vanished. "Look at this," Kevin said. "Every species Sigma has killed has a clean, efficient immune response. Their systems identify threats, categorize them, and deploy targeted defenses. It is elegant. It is effective. And Sigma tears right through it, because Sigma does not play by the rules those systems were built for." "And humans?" Lisa asked. Kevin pulled up the human data. "Humans are chaos. Our immune systems overreact to everything. We get allergies. Our bodies panic over pollen and peanuts. We get autoimmune diseases. Our cells attack our own tissue for no good reason. We have redundant systems, backup systems, and backup systems for the backup systems. Half the time, our immune response does not even make sense." "You are saying our immune system is too messy for Sigma to exploit." "I am saying that Sigma is designed to crack efficient systems. It looks for patterns, finds the structure, and takes it apart. But human biology does not have a clean structure for it to crack. When Sigma enters a human body, it encounters so many contradictory, overlapping, chaotic responses that it cannot establish a foothold. Our immune system throws everything at it, including defenses that have no logical reason to work against this kind of threat. And somehow, through sheer biological stubbornness, it holds." Lisa sat down slowly. The implications were enormous. "We are immune," she said. "Not because we are strong, because we are a mess." Kevin almost laughed. "Evolution did not give us the best immune system. It gave us the most paranoid immune system. And right now, that paranoia is the only thing standing between the human species and extinction." They brought the findings to Admiral Hartley the next morning. She listened carefully, asked sharp questions, and then sat quietly for a full minute, processing. "So humanity survives," she said finally. "What about everyone else?" Kevin and Lisa looked at each other. That was the question neither of them had wanted to face yet. "If we can understand exactly how our immune response neutralizes Sigma," Kevin said carefully, "there might be a way to develop a treatment, something based on human biology that could help other species fight it off." "Might," Hartley repeated. "It is a long shot," Lisa admitted, "but it is the only shot anyone has." Hartley nodded once. "Then get to work. The galaxy does not have time for second chances." The news that humans were immune to pathogen Sigma spread across Earth like a wave. For a few days, there was relief. People hugged each other in the streets. News anchors smiled, for the first time in months. Parents told their children that everything was going to be okay. But the relief did not last long, because once the fear of dying faded, a much harder question took its place. The rest of the galaxy was still burning. Hundreds of species were still falling, and humanity, the only species that could walk through the plague and live, had to decide what to do about it. The debate tore through every government, every news channel, every dinner table on the planet. One side said the answer was obvious. Stay home. Seal the borders. Let the plague run its course. In a few decades, Sigma would burn through every host in the galaxy and die out on its own. And then humanity could expand into all that empty space. It was cold, it was practical, and millions of people supported it. The other side said something different. They said that if humanity sat behind its walls and watched the galaxy die, then survival meant nothing. They said that being the last one standing was not a victory if you had to live with the knowledge that you could have helped and chose not to. Admiral Hartley was the one who settled the argument. She stood before the United Nations General Assembly in New York, in a chamber that had seen 1,000 historic speeches, and she made her case. "I am not going to stand here and talk about strategy," she said. Her voice was calm, but it carried to every corner of the room. "I am not going to talk about resources, or trade advantages, or territorial expansion. I am going to talk about who we are. If we close our eyes and lock our doors, and let every other living civilization in this galaxy die while we have the power to help them, then we are not worth saving. Our children will inherit an empty galaxy, and when they ask us what happened, we will have to tell them the truth. We watched, and we did nothing." The vote passed. It was close, but it passed. Operation Threshold was authorized within the week. It would be a combined military and scientific mission sent directly into plague-affected space. The goals were simple on paper and terrifying in practice. Go into the dead zone, find survivors, gather data on Sigma, and if possible, trace the plague back to its source. The mission needed a commander, and Hartley chose Captain Daniel Marsh. Daniel was not the most decorated officer in the fleet. He was not the most famous. He had spent most of his career running quiet patrol routes along the outer colonies, stopping smugglers and settling minor disputes. He was 41 years old, average height, with brown hair that was starting to go gray at the temples, and a face that people tended to trust without quite knowing why. Hartley chose him because she had read every report he had ever filed, and in every single one, no matter how routine the mission, Daniel Marsh treated people like they mattered. Human, alien, civilian, criminal. It did not make a difference. He listened, he cared, and in a mission where the crew would be walking through the graveyard of 1,000 civilizations, Hartley decided that caring was the most important qualification a commander could have. Daniel's ship was the ESS Resolute, a deep space cruiser that had been stripped down and rebuilt for the mission. It carried a crew of 200, a fully equipped medical bay, and enough supplies to operate independently for over a year. Lisa Grant was on board, leading a science team of 20. Kevin Porter stayed behind on Earth to continue working on the treatment, but he spent 2 hours on a video call with Lisa the night before departure, going over data and giving her one final piece of advice. "If you find where Sigma came from," Kevin said, his face serious on the screen, "do not be a hero. Record everything, touch nothing, and come home." Lisa smiled tiredly. "Since when am I the heroic type?" "Since you volunteered to fly into a galaxy-wide plague zone. Be careful, Lisa." The Resolute crossed the quarantine perimeter on a gray morning in March. The crew stood at their stations and watched through the viewports as Earth's defense grid fell behind them. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the low hum of the engines, carrying them forward into the dark. The first system they entered had belonged to the Telleri, an aquatic species who had built beautiful underwater cities across a chain of ocean worlds. The planet was still there. The oceans were still blue. From orbit, it looked peaceful, almost inviting. But the scanners told a different story. Lieutenant Chris Dunn, the ship's chief science officer, ran the readings 3 times before he reported them. He was a quiet man, careful with his words, and the way his voice shook when he finally spoke told Daniel everything he needed to know. "There is nothing alive down there," Chris said. "Nothing. No marine life, no plant life, no microbial life. The oceans are sterile. Sigma did not just kill the Talari, it killed their entire world. Daniel stared at the blue planet below them. It was like looking at a beautiful painting of something that no longer existed. A memory of life, with nothing real behind it. Log everything, Daniel said quietly, and moved to the next system. They visited 11 dead worlds in the first 2 weeks. Intact cities, empty skies, and silence so deep it pressed against the walls of the ship. The crew handled it differently. Some grew quiet. Some talked too much. A few started having trouble sleeping. Daniel made sure the ship's counselor was available around the clock, and he made a point of eating meals in the common area, where his crew could see him, calm and steady, even when he did not feel calm or steady at all. They found the first survivors on day 23. It was a mining asteroid in a system that had belonged to the Korath Dominion. The asteroid had a small emergency bunker, sealed tight, with its own air recycling system and a tiny fusion generator that had been running on fumes for months. Inside were 16 Korath, 9 adults, 4 adolescents, and 3 children. The Korath were large reptilian beings with thick scaled skin and deep-set eyes. They were known across the galaxy as fierce warriors, proud and unyielding. But the 16 survivors who stumbled out of that bunker when the Resolute's rescue team cut through the door were thin, exhausted, and barely standing. Their leader was a scarred old veteran. The universal translator rendered his name as Stoneclaw. He had been a military commander once. Now he was just a tired old man trying to keep 16 people alive in a metal box floating in dead space. When Stoneclaw saw the human soldiers standing in the airlock, he stopped walking. He stared at them for a long time. His jaw moved slightly, and the translator picked up words that were almost too quiet to hear. "You came," Stoneclaw said. "You actually came out here." Daniel stepped forward and offered his hand. "We are not leaving anyone behind, not if we can help it." Stoneclaw looked at Daniel's hand, then at his face. Then the old Korath reached out with a heavy clawed hand and gripped Daniel's forearm in what the translator described as a warrior's greeting, a gesture reserved for those who had earned deep respect. "Your species is either the bravest in the galaxy," Stoneclaw said, "or the most foolish." Daniel smiled slightly. "We have been asking ourselves the same question." The Korath survivors were brought aboard the Resolute, given food, medical care, and warm beds. The children fell asleep almost immediately, curled up in the medical bay under blankets that were too small for their frames. One of the Korath adolescents, a young female with bright amber eyes, asked Chris Dunn if the stars outside were safe now. Chris did not know how to answer that. He just told her that the ship was safe, and that was enough for now. Daniel sent a report back to Earth that night. He described the dead worlds, the empty oceans, the 16 survivors in their tiny bunker. He included a recommendation that more ships be sent, with more supplies and more medical staff, because if there were survivors here, there would be survivors elsewhere, scattered, frightened, running out of time, but alive. At the end of the report, he wrote one line that was not part of any official format. "The galaxy is not dead yet, but it will be soon if we do not move faster." Hartley read the report, then she started making calls. The Resolute pushed deeper into the dead zone. Every day, the ship moved further from Earth, further from safety, and deeper into a part of the galaxy where nothing lived anymore. The stars out here looked the same as they did from Earth, bright and endless, but the space between them felt heavier somehow, emptier. Like the universe itself knew that something terrible had passed through and had not yet recovered from the loss. Lisa Grant barely left her laboratory. She had set up a workspace in a converted storage room near the back of the ship, and she spent 18 hours a day there, surrounded by screens full of biological data, genetic sequences, and three-dimensional models of Sigma at the molecular level. She ate when someone brought her food. She slept when her body refused to stay awake any longer. And slowly, one piece at a time, she was building a picture of the plague that had killed the galaxy. What she found scared her more than anything else in her life. "It is not natural," she told Daniel during one of their evening briefings. They sat in his small office, a cramped room with a desk, 2 chairs, and a viewport that showed nothing but stars. "I have studied every kind of pathogen that has ever existed on Earth, and Kevin has done the same. Nothing in nature behaves like this. A natural virus specializes. It evolves for one type of host, maybe a handful of related species. Sigma adapts to everything. Every biology, every biochemistry, every cellular structure. It rewrites itself in hours to exploit whatever it finds." Daniel listened carefully. He had learned early in the mission that Lisa thought out loud, and the best thing he could do was let her talk until she reached the point she was circling around. "What are you telling me?" he asked. Lisa met his eyes. "Sigma was designed. Someone built this, Daniel. Someone engineered a pathogen that could kill any living thing in the galaxy, and they released it." The words sat in the room between them like a weight. "Do you know who?" Daniel asked. "No, but the deeper we go, the more I can trace its genetic signature back toward a point of origin. It is old, incredibly old. The core structure of Sigma has markers that suggest it has been drifting through space for thousands of years. Whatever civilization created it may not even exist anymore." Daniel thought about that. A weapon so old that its creators were already dust. A plague with no one left to stop it, and no one left to blame. We find the source. 3 more weeks of travel brought them to the Valen Expanse. The Expanse was a region of space that most galactic maps marked with warnings and very little detail. It was a place of dead stars, ancient debris fields, and massive structures that no living civilization had built or claimed. Explorers who had visited the Expanse before the plague had reported finding ruins. Enormous constructions of metal and organic material, clearly the work of an intelligent species, but so old that even the most advanced dating methods could not pin down their age. Whoever had built them was long gone. The galactic community had simply called them the precursors and moved on. Now, following the trail of Sigma backward through space and time, the Resolute entered the Expanse and found what Lisa had been looking for. It was a station, or maybe it was something more than a station. It hung in orbit around a dying red dwarf star, a vast structure that looked almost alive. Its surface was not metal or stone. It was something organic, something that pulsed with a faint, slow glow, like the heartbeat of a sleeping creature. It was enormous, easily 10 times the size of the Resolute, and it was old beyond anything the crew had ever seen. "That is the source," Lisa said. She was standing on the bridge, staring at the readings on Chris Dunn's sensor display. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Sigma is coming from that station. It is producing the pathogen and releasing it into space, continuously. And based on the decay patterns in the surrounding debris, it has been doing this for at least 10,000 years. The bridge crew went completely silent. 10,000 years. Sigma had been drifting outward from this point for 10,000 years, crossing the vast empty spaces between stars at a pace too slow to notice. And then, when it finally reached the inhabited galaxy, it had found the shipping lanes, the trade routes, the communication relays that connected civilization together, and it had spread along those connections like fire along a fuse. Civilization itself had become the thing that carried the plague to every doorstep. Daniel stood at the center of his bridge and looked at the ancient station on the view screen. He could feel the eyes of his entire crew on him. "Suit up a boarding team," he said. "Full hazard gear. 12 volunteers. I am leading them in myself. Lisa immediately protested. Daniel, we do not know what is in there. We do not know if our immunity holds against concentrated sigma at the source. Let me send probes first. Probes take time we do not have, Daniel said. Every hour that station keeps running, more of the galaxy dies. We go in, we figure out how to shut it down, and we get out. But I want you on the team. If anyone can understand what we find in there, it is you. Lisa held his gaze for a moment, then nodded. The boarding team crossed from the Resolute to the ancient station in a small shuttle. Up close, the station was even stranger than it had appeared on sensors. The surface was warm to the touch, even through their gloves. The airlock, if that was what it was, opened without resistance, as if the station had been waiting for visitors. Inside, the corridors were wide and tall, built for beings larger than humans. The walls glowed with the same faint bioluminescence as the exterior, giving everything a soft, eerie light. The air was breathable, which was unexpected, and every scanner the team carried showed traces of sigma everywhere. In the air, on the surfaces, in the very walls themselves. But no one got sick. The human immune system held, just as Kevin had predicted. They found the first bodies 2 levels in. Or rather, they found what was left of them. The precursors, whoever they had been, had sealed their dead in crystallized caskets lining the walls of a long, cathedral-like chamber. The bodies inside were preserved perfectly. Tall, 6-limbed beings with elongated skulls and delicate, many-jointed hands. They looked peaceful, as if they had simply gone to sleep. Lisa spent hours examining the caskets and the inscriptions that covered the chamber walls. The language was unlike anything in the galactic database, but the station's own systems seemed to recognize that someone was trying to read them, and slowly, displays around the chamber began to activate, projecting images and data that Lisa could work with. It took her 3 sleepless days to piece the story together. They were dying, she told Daniel. They were sitting in the central chamber of the station, surrounded by the soft glow of ancient machines. Not from a plague, from themselves. Their species had a genetic disorder, something degenerative that had been getting worse with every generation. Their bodies were breaking down at the cellular level. They tried everything to stop it, and nothing worked. She gestured at the production core, a massive organic structure at the heart of the station that still hummed with quiet energy. Still producing sigma, still sending it out into the void. So they built sigma, she continued. They engineered it as a cure, a pathogen that could rewrite damaged DNA, repair broken cells, and restore biological function. And it worked. It saved them. For a while, at least. Daniel looked at the ancient bodies in their crystal caskets. But it got out. It got out, Lisa confirmed. And when it encountered biologies it was never designed for, it did what it was built to do. It rewrote them. But the rewrites were not repairs. They were destruction. What healed one species became lethal to every other. And by the time the precursors realized what had happened, sigma had already spread beyond their ability to contain it. She paused. Her eyes were tired and sad. They were not monsters, Daniel. They were desperate people trying to save their children. And their cure became the thing that killed the galaxy. Daniel sat with that for a long time. He looked at the inscriptions on the walls, at the careful, desperate records of a civilization that had tried everything and failed in the worst possible way. Can you shut it down? He asked. Lisa looked at the production core. Yes, I think so. It will take time, but the systems are old and the shutdown protocols are still in the database. I can do it. Then do it, Daniel said, and when you are done, we go home and we save whoever is left. It took Lisa and her team 4 days to shut down the Sigma production core. The process was delicate and nerve-wracking. The ancient systems were fragile, and more than once, Lisa was certain that one wrong command would trigger a catastrophic release instead of a shutdown. But piece by piece, Protocol by protocol, she worked her way through the precursor database. And on the fourth day, the great organic heart of the station shuddered, pulsed one final time, and went dark. Chris Dunn confirmed it from the Resolute. No new pathogen was being released. The source of the plague that had consumed the galaxy was finally silent. The crew did not celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate. Sigma was still out there, already spread across thousands of star systems, already embedded in the atmospheres of countless worlds. Stopping the source was like turning off a faucet while the house was still flooded. The dying was not over, but it was a start. The Resolute turned for home. The journey back took weeks, and Daniel used every hour of it preparing reports, consulting with Lisa, and planning what needed to happen next. By the time they crossed the quarantine perimeter and docked at Perimeter Station 7, Nathan Cole was waiting for them, with a secure channel to Admiral Hartley already open. "Welcome home, Captain," Nathan said as Daniel stepped off the shuttle. Nathan looked older than Daniel remembered. 6 months of turning away refugee ships had carved lines into his face that had not been there before. Daniel shook his hand. "It is good to be back, but we are not staying long." Back on Earth, the data from the precursor station changed everything. Kevin Porter and his team had been working around the clock on a treatment, and the detailed genetic records Lisa brought home gave them the final pieces of the puzzle. Kevin called it the Porter Protocol. It was not a cure, and it was not a vaccine. It was something in between, a biological treatment derived from specific proteins found in the human immune response. When introduced into an alien organism, these proteins did not fight Sigma directly. Instead, they disrupted the pathogen's ability to rewrite itself, slowing it down long enough for the host's own immune system to mount a defense. For species with even a fragment of surviving immune function, it was enough to turn a death sentence into a fighting chance. But there was a catch. The key component of the treatment was a protein complex found in human bone marrow. It was rare, difficult to extract, and impossible to produce artificially with any technology available. Every dose of the treatment required a human donor, and the process was slow and painful. When the call went out for volunteers, Kevin expected a modest response. He was wrong. Within 48 hours, donor registration centers across the planet were overwhelmed. People lined up around the block in every major city on Earth. Young people, old people, healthy people, people who were terrified of needles but showed up anyway. Office workers took days off. Students skipped classes. A 73-year-old retired teacher in Ohio drove 4 hours to the nearest center because the one in her town was already full. The news showed the lines stretching down sidewalks and through parking lots. Reporters asked people why they were volunteering for a procedure that was painful and came with no reward. The answers were almost always the same. Because someone out there needs it. Because I can. Because what else am I going to do? It was never going to be enough. The galaxy was vast, and the number of survivors was unknown, and the treatment had to be delivered in person to every individual patient. But it was what humanity had, and they gave it freely. Admiral Hartley organized the distribution with the same fierce efficiency she brought to everything. She assembled a fleet of 30 ships, crewed entirely by human volunteers, and loaded them with as much of the treatment as Earth could produce. The crews called themselves the Torchbearers, and the name stuck. Daniel Marsh commanded the first wave. He had been home for exactly 11 days. He had slept in his own bed, eaten meals that were not from a ship's galley, and stood in his backyard under an open sky for the first time in over a year. It had felt good. It had felt like something worth protecting. And then he had gone back to Hartley and told her he was ready to go out again. His entire crew had done the same. Every single one of them. The torchbearers spread out across the galaxy. They followed distress signals, scanned for life signs on dead worlds, and searched every bunker, every sealed shelter, every hidden corner where survivors might still be holding on. It was slow, exhausting, heartbreaking work. For every group they found alive, there were 10 worlds where they found nothing but silence. But the groups they found were enough. On a world called Thesara Prime, once home to billions of Alani, Daniel's team discovered an underground shelter containing roughly 600 survivors. The Alani were bird-like beings with iridescent feathers that shimmered even in low light. They had sealed themselves underground when the plague hit, rationing food and recycling air, waiting for a rescue that most of them had stopped believing would come. When the shelter doors opened and human medics walked in, carrying cases of the Porter Protocol, the Alani did not react at first. They just stared. 600 pairs of large dark eyes watching these strange, small, soft-skinned creatures from a planet most of them had never heard of. The medics got to work. They set up stations, calibrated dosages for Alani biology, and began administering the treatment one patient at a time. It was slow. Each dose took nearly an hour to prepare and deliver. But the medics were patient, and they smiled at their patients. And they learned the Alani word for thank you by the end of the first day. On the third day, an elderly Alani female approached Daniel. She was thin, her feathers dull from malnutrition, but she carried herself with a dignity that made the air around her feel almost sacred. She was a historian, the other Alani told him later. She had spent her life recording the stories of her people. She looked at Daniel for a long time before she spoke. "Why did you come?" she asked. The translator gave her words a musical quality, like a song that had forgotten its melody. "Your species owes us nothing. We never helped you. We barely knew you existed. The galaxy has 1,000 reasons to abandon us, and you had every right to stay safe behind your walls. So why did you come?" Daniel thought about it. He could have given a political answer, a strategic answer, a noble answer full of big words and grand ideals. But this old woman deserved something honest. "Because you are alive," he said. "And as long as you are alive, you matter." The Alani historian studied him with her large, dark eyes. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite understanding, but something close to wonder. Then she did something that made every Alani in the shelter fall completely silent. She spread her wings, thin and trembling, and she bowed. One of the younger Alani whispered to Chris Dunn that this gesture had not been offered to a stranger in over 1,000 years of their history. It meant trust. Complete, unconditional, absolute trust. The story spread. It moved from system to system, from survivor group to survivor group, carried by the few communication relays that still functioned. A species from a small, unremarkable world on the outer edge of the galaxy had survived the plague that killed everyone else. And instead of hiding, instead of conquering, instead of taking advantage of a galaxy on its knees, they had come back for the rest of them. They came with medicine made from their own bodies. They came with food and blankets and doctors who learned alien words for comfort. They came not because they had to, not because they wanted something in return, but because they looked at a dying galaxy and decided that they were not willing to let it die alone. Months passed. The Porter Protocol saved lives. Not all of them, not nearly enough of them, but enough. Slowly, painfully, the survivors of 100 different species began to come together. Communication networks were rebuilt. Supply lines were established. For the first time since the plague had begun, the galaxy was not shrinking. It was holding. The new Galactic Assembly held its first meeting on a rebuilt station above Thesara Prime. Representatives from every surviving species were present. There were not many of them. Hundreds of species had been lost forever. Thousands of worlds would remain empty for centuries. The scars were deep and would take generations to heal. And they were together. Stoneclaw, the old Korath veteran who had been rescued from a mining bunker by the Resolutes so many months ago, stood before the assembly as a representative of his people. He was still scarred, still rough around the edges, still every bit the warrior he had always been. But there was something softer in his eyes now, something that had not been there before. "We always wondered," he said, his deep voice filling the chamber, "what made humans different from the rest of us. They are not the strongest species, they are not the fastest, or the smartest, or the most advanced. By every measure the old galaxy used to rank civilizations, humanity was average at best." He paused and looked across the room at Daniel Marsh, who was sitting quietly in the human delegation, looking slightly uncomfortable with the attention. "Now we know what makes them different. When the void came for us, when everything was falling and the darkness was swallowing the galaxy whole, humanity did not run. They did not hide. They did not calculate the cost or weigh the risk. They looked into the dark, and their first instinct, their very first thought, was to reach out their hand and pull someone else to safety." The chamber was quiet. Not the empty quiet of dead worlds and silent stars, but a living quiet. The kind that happens when a room full of people is feeling the same thing at the same time. Then from somewhere in the assembly, a sound began. It was not clapping. It was not cheering. It was a low hum, a vibration that seemed to rise up from the floor itself. Other species joined in, each adding their own voice, their own frequency, until the chamber resonated with a sound that had never been heard before in the history of the galaxy. The combined voices of a dozen different species, singing together for the first time. It was not a song of victory. It was something quieter than that, something deeper. It was the sound of a galaxy that had been broken and was beginning, slowly, to put itself back together. And at its center, steady and stubborn and imperfect and absolutely unwilling to give up, were the humans. They had carried the torch through the darkest night the galaxy had ever known, and now, together with the survivors they had saved, they were going to build something new in the light. It would not be the same as what came before. It could not be. Too much had been lost. But it would be alive, and it would be real, and it would remember. And that in the end was enough. The galaxy had been full of life, for as long as anyone could remember. Thousands of civilizations lived among the stars. They traded with each other, argued with each other, and filled every corner of known space with their voices. Radio signals, light pulses, quantum transmissions. The galaxy was never quiet. It was a noisy, messy, wonderful place. Then the voices started to disappear. It began on the edges of civilized space, in the far-off systems where the smaller empires lived. The Villarni Collective, a massive insectoid civilization that controlled 40 star systems, went completely silent in less than 30 days. Their final transmission was a broken distress call, repeating biohazard warnings in every language their computers knew. The signal played on a loop for 2 weeks. Then, it stopped. The Galactic Forum, a loose alliance of the major spacefaring species, told everyone not to worry. The Villarni had always been unstable. Civil wars, political collapses, these things happened. There was no reason to panic. But then, the Korath Dominion stopped responding to messages. The Korath were a proud reptilian species with one of the strongest militaries in the galaxy. They did not just go quiet. Something had to be very wrong. After the Korath, the Alani Republic fell silent. Then, the Myrathi Communion. Then, the Drassic Swarm. One by one, like candles being blown out in a dark room, entire civilizations vanished from the galactic map. On Earth, a planet most alien species considered small and unimportant, a woman named Lisa Grant was paying very close attention. Lisa was a xenobiologist. She worked at the United Nations Stellar Research Institute in Geneva, and she had spent the last 9 years of her life studying alien biology. She collected data from diplomatic exchanges, medical files shared between species, anything she could get her hands on. It was quiet, careful work, and most of the time, nobody paid much attention to it. But now, sitting in her small office surrounded by screens full of data, Lisa could see something that terrified her. The species that had gone silent were not just losing contact. They were dying. Every single one of them. And they were dying from the same thing. She called Kevin Porter. Kevin was a virologist. He had spent most of his career at the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta, studying the worst diseases Earth had ever produced. Ebola, plague, influenza. Kevin had seen them all. He was good at his job, calm under pressure, and very hard to scare. But when he arrived in Geneva, and Lisa showed him what she had found, the color drained from his face. "This is not a normal pathogen," Lisa told him. They were standing in front of a massive display that showed the biological data from 7 different dead civilizations. "Look at the pattern. It hits a new species, and within days, it has already adapted to their specific biology. It finds their weaknesses and exploits them, every single time." Kevin studied the data in silence for a long time. He pulled up comparison charts, ran numbers in his head, and then sat down heavily in the nearest chair. "Lisa," he said slowly, "this thing is not just adapting. It is rewriting itself for every new host. That is not how natural diseases work. This is something else entirely." "I know," she said. They brought their findings to Admiral Grace Hartley, the head of Earth's Stellar Defense Command. Hartley was a woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes and silver hair cut short. She had commanded ships, fought pirates in the outer colonies, and faced down alien warlords without blinking. But when Lisa and Kevin laid out the data in her office, she went very still. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Hartley said. She stood up and walked to the holographic map that filled one entire wall. The map showed all of known space. Large sections of it were now colored red, areas where no living civilizations remained. "You are telling me that there is a disease out there that is killing every intelligent species it touches." "Not just intelligent species," Lisa said. "Everything. Plants, animals, microbes. It wipes out entire biospheres. When it is done with a planet, there is nothing left alive, not even bacteria." Hartley stared at the red zones on the map. They covered almost a quarter of the galaxy now, and they were growing every day. "How does it spread?" Hartley asked. "Every way you can imagine," Kevin answered. "Air, water, physical contact, contaminated surfaces. It can even spread through certain wavelengths of light on worlds with photosynthetic life. Once it arrives on a planet, it moves through the population in a matter of weeks. There is no documented case of any species developing resistance." The room was quiet. Outside the window, the sun was setting over Geneva, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It looked peaceful, it looked normal, but nothing was normal anymore. "How long?" Hartley asked. Her voice was steady, but her hands were gripping the edge of her desk. Kevin glanced at Lisa. She nodded for him to go ahead. "Based on its current rate of spread," Kevin said, "it will reach inhabited space near the Sol system in approximately 18 months. Could be less if it finds a fast transmission route through a trade lane or a refugee fleet." Hartley turned away from the map and looked at both of them. There was something in her eyes that was not quite fear. It was harder than fear. It was the look of someone who had just accepted a terrible truth and was already thinking about what to do next. "Then here is what is going to happen," she said. "I am going to request an emergency session of the UN Security Council. I am going to recommend a full quarantine of the Sol system. Nothing comes in, nothing goes out, until we understand what we are dealing with. And the two of you are going to figure out why this thing kills everything it touches." She paused and looked at them both. "And you are going to figure out whether it will kill us too." Lisa nodded. Kevin nodded. Neither of them said what they were both thinking, that there was no reason to believe humans would be any different from the hundreds of species that had already fallen. Earth was small. Humanity was young. They had only been part of the galactic community for a few decades. They were not special. But they were alive, and for now that was enough. Lisa went back to her lab that night and worked until 3 in the morning. She pulled up every piece of data she had on pathogen Sigma, as the scientific community had started calling it. She compared its genetic structure across dozens of host species. She ran simulations. She drank too much coffee and forgot to eat dinner. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice kept repeating the same question over and over. Why was the galaxy dying? And was there anything at all that humanity could do to stop it? She did not have an answer yet, but she was not going to stop looking for one.